What's up, good folks? Your boy Willie Lee Habmedi, first of his name, GodColor.com. By the way, today we're gonna talk about pair bonding 2020 and beyond. But before we talk about pair bonding 2020 and beyond, we gotta actually look at the past. Like, where did pair bonding come from? This thing we call relationships, this thing we call marriage, right? So let's go back to yesteryear. We can look back to maybe 1950s. We had a man that said he was 20 years old, and he met a young lady that was 20 years old, and they decided to spend the rest of their lives together. Well, this man had to present himself with a plan. Like, he had to have some kind of job. He had to either be working in a warehouse, blue collar kind of work, or he actually had, what do we call it, like a white collar job. He was a supervisor. He pushed paperwork. He was an entrepreneur. He had goals, ambition, and dreams. And to prove to this woman that he was vying for her affection and attention, this courting process, he had to show a certain capability. So this woman, maybe she was looking for a man who had aspirations on, you know, owning a home, being afforded with the opportunities in life that the upper class or the middle class had to offer. So maybe he was showcasing his education, like he was going to college, he was working towards some things, he had a apprenticeship somewhere in some kind of skilled trade, plumbing, carpentry, construction, or he worked in an automotive plant. Me being a Midwest man myself, I understand that. Like, my father was an automotive man. He worked in a GM, General Motors plant for the most part of his life. So he had certain opportunities with women in that regard because he can showcase a certain kind of ability to provide, right? So this man had this to offer. And when he met this young lady and he vied for her attention, he can present himself as such. So the aspects of pair bonding were quite lucrative for him. Like, he had a plethora of options. And when he settled on an option, he looked for the best viable candidate. Again, this is a 20-year-old man and a 20-year-old woman. So they decide to pair. And they can live happily ever after in that way, because during those time frames, the lack of options, or not really lack of options, but the location-based options that you had really limited a person. You didn't have a man in Michigan and a woman in Michigan being able to court and date somebody in California, Nebraska, Florida, New York, and likewise, right? Or even Africa, Brazil, Asia. It was a lot more limited at that time. So you went with the best option in your location. The woman chose the man because of such, and the man chose the woman based off her youth, beauty, and ability to raise some children. Well, fast forward today, relationships don't work out no more, right? Like, we see so many people go through all these relationship woes. And while they're going through these relationship woes, it's because a lot of times they have so many options. We have this thing, I don't know if y'all heard of it, called internet. And on the internet, people have so many options now. And just like when you go through Netflix and you scroll and scroll and scroll and you can't find a show to watch, and you went through maybe 100, 150 shows and can't find anything to settle on, that's the same wealth of options that cripple a person today in the dating market. You have so many options, so it makes it hard to settle down and deal with just one. That's one of the aspects of the modern dating today. And also, we want to look at what has happened in male and female relationships. So again, going back to this 20-year-old man, 20-year-old woman, they understood their roles. And now today, we don't have those roles. See, there used to be something called shame. When a man left a woman who bore his children, who married him, he was shamed by society for such. When a woman had children and she was not with her husband, she was shamed in society as such. And it was even a time when, I believe it was in the 1960s, when they had this Moynihan report the Department of Labor and Statistics, I believe it was. And they said it was an epidemic where 25% of African American children were born out of wedlock. And at those times, like, it was an epidemic because it had never been seen before. Like, usually it was 80 to 90% of children were born to two-parent homes with a married mother and father. And if a child was not with a two-parent home, it was usually because the mother was a widow. Like, the father went and fought a war, died in this war, and now this mother was a single mother, and men came and championed these women. Like, they went out and they actually married these women for the second time, these widows. There was no shame in that. There was no shame in helping these damsels who were perceived to be in distress. After all, we were living in a time frame where women didn't work, women didn't get educations. So if a man, hypothetically speaking, if a man was 35 years old and his 35-year-old wife, they met at 20 again, right? So this man, 35 years old, and he decides, I want to get a younger version of her. And he left this woman. We had laws that put in place for that. So, man leaves this 35-year-old woman because he wants a younger version of her. This woman don't held him down, cooked, cleaned, took care of the kids, reared the children, took care of the household, managed the household, things like such, right? But now he's sending her back out into the marketplace, a divorcee with children with no marketable skills. Like, she didn't get an education. She didn't find ways, or she didn't have opportunities financially at that time. So we created things called child support, meaning that you had children by this woman or this woman at 35 years old, and now you want to leave her for a younger version of her with no way of financially taking care of herself or the children. Well, now you're going to have to pay for that. You're going to have to pay for those children's upbringing as if you were still there. We created something called spousal support. And with this spousal support, we said, you know what? Since you left this woman at 35, 15 years after meeting, courting her, and promising her happily ever after, well, you're going to have to pay for that. So she's accustomed to a certain lifestyle now that you must maintain because she cannot financially take care of herself or the children. You broke the vows. So those laws went into place. And now when we look into pair bonding 2020 and beyond, we can see that those laws are, I wouldn't say archaic, but they are quite ancient now. Like, we live in a day, gender equality, where women are working. Women are getting educations at even higher levels of men now. Women are out earning their male counterparts in a lot of different areas of society now. And of course, these gaps are not closed all the way, but women have made such strides that we basically took, imagine that we had 100% of the labor force was all men. So you had 100% of the jobs going to this 100% of the men in the labor force. Well, then you say, you know what, we're going to double the labor force while still maintaining the same number of jobs. So we added 100% of women to the labor force, potentially, and not have as many jobs that we can offer to this doubling of the labor force. So that means that women were getting jobs now that men were not getting. Men often weren't qualified for it because they didn't go get their educations. They didn't go and find their purpose, find a role to play as the man in the 50s did. The 20-year-old in the 50s got him a warehouse job or worked toward his education or got him a white-collar job, and he was able to present himself with such. Men today find themselves oftentimes without those same opportunities. Or they didn't really learn through their adolescence that those things were important. So they played around. They played the games. They got on video games. They hung around with their homies. They got drunk. They got high. They didn't take life seriously as they entered into adulthood. So we have a market today where women are dissatisfied with their options and men are dissatisfied with their options. And how do we fix this? Like, how do we go forward and make something happen that we can actually have equitable pair bonding that's equal for both sides, that's mutually beneficial for both sides? So With that being said, I want to wrap up the video. We're gonna continue this on my podcast with the audio. But I want to wrap up the video there saying this is Willie Lee Hab, married first of his name, GodColor.com. By the way, make sure you're visiting GodColor.com/podcast if you want to see the latest. And if you want to support God Color, make sure you visit GodColor.com/shop, where you can support the channel, you can support the brand, and see all the cool things we're building. And again, before I close with this on the video tip, we're going to continue this on the audio. But before I close, I want to say this is not a man versus woman or a woman versus man. Like, we need to work together. Instead of this age of feminism, we need to bring into womanism for the woman. And of course, a man can't tell a woman nothing these days. Of course, I understand that, right? We have been, I guess, dictating femininity or shaming tactics to women for centuries now, right? And it's time the woman had her due. I understand all that. But we cannot build together fighting with each other. Like, we are two sides of the same coin. One side is male, one side is female. To castigate and disparage and ostracize and demonize one side of the coin is, well, to devalue the coin altogether. So learning how to work together is something that we're going to have to do. Stay tuned. Peace.